crossed. Like I said, it's getting real hard to.
Yeah. I'll press record. We will be recording this webinar, should I stay or should I go, as we have done with previous webinars that Ed has presented on, and they'll be available at the PAT website along with Ed's presentation and any accompanying supporting useful resources that you all can benefit from that he brings into the show tonight. So sorry, Julie, you muted me. She didn't like how I was going with this. There will be a pause in different sections of Ed's presentation for questions and answers, and then of course we'll do some Q&A at the end. But I'll feel free to throw questions into the chat, as well as when we call for question and answer, if you want to come off mute and raise your question with Ed, that would be really great. So with that being said, Ed, I will pass the baton over to you to kick us off.
Thank you very much. I sure appreciate it. Thank you all very much for taking the time to be here. I guess we'll go ahead and dive right in. Just by way of a fair warning, I have a new computer that I'm trying to navigate through. And so if it seems like I'm a little befuddled, it's because I'm a little befuddled. But I know that many of you have seen this presentation before. I've updated it a little bit. I also know from experience that it takes at least 3 or 4 times of hearing this information for it to really start to make sense. So I am hoping that even if you have seen it before, you'll still get something from it. As always, I am available to answer questions even after the presentation. If you want to drop me an email and say, hey, my situation's a little different, what do you think about this? I'm happy to help you with that. As Peter said, my name is Ed Foster. I'm a local boy, graduated from Portland State University with a degree in English. I'm actually starting my 20th year in the business here. And for most of that time, at least 17, 18 years at least, I've worked with PAT. I don't work for PAT. I don't work for PERS, and I don't work for PPS. I'm an independent financial advisor. And my specialty is really helping educators understand how their pension works, what their retirement options look like, and trying to get people situated both before and in retirement so that they can enjoy their lives. It's been an interesting couple of years, as I'm sure you all know. Last year was either the busiest or second busiest year I have had. And I expect this year is also going to be quite busy for a variety of reasons. The question of, is it time to go, has become first and foremost on most people's minds. So don't feel like you're alone in wondering. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll have a better idea of what issues need to be considered to answer that question. Let's see. Oh, yeah. So tonight, what I hope to cover, and I don't believe it's going to take too long, but we'll go through it and make sure everybody understands it. We're going to talk about PERS, and we're going to talk about the IAP account. We're going to talk about what the district has to offer. In the past, I've kind of done it from the other direction. I started with the district and worked down to PERS, and I've revamped it starting with PERS. One is the more complicated of the items, and I think hitting that while we're all still kind of awake is probably the best choice. And then they kind of feed into each other better that way. So hopefully that'll make sense, more sense maybe than it has in the past. So we'll talk about pension, what options are available. We'll actually hopefully help you understand how your pension is calculated. And then we'll talk about the bubble and those issues as well. Let's see. Before I get too far into that, though, I do want to do a little housekeeping, if you will. I know that many educators have student loans, and I know that those have been on deferment for quite some time. And it's important to note some deadlines coming up, not least of which being the end of January. Starting in February, loan payments, student loan payments need to begin again. I know student loans can be very confusing. There's some guides, some things out there that can help you with that. And one of those things is the student loan program at the NEA member benefits website. So I put the website down there at the bottom, about halfway down that page. You'll see a thing for helping, it's called the Student Debt Navigator. And it'll help you understand kind of what needs to happen and when, and go forward from there. But just so everybody's aware that unless something radical changes in the next week or so, student loan payments are going to need to begin again. So I want to make sure everybody's aware of that. Okay. First, we'll start with that. Let me just make a quick note here. So I like to start with this slide. And the reason for that is most people now understand or know what they are in terms of what tier they are in the PERS system. But because it's so important, I want to make sure we're all playing off of the same sheet music here. Knowing that the designation of tier determines a number of things, how your pension is calculated, when you can retire with full benefits, and what options are available to you to some extent. So it's important to understand that. Fortunately, it's not too complicated. If you were hired before 1996, you're tier 1. If you were hired between 1996 and 2003, you're tier 2. And if you were hired after August 29th, 2003, you are what they call OPSRP. I wish they called it tier 3, but they didn't. And we'll talk about the differences a little bit between those, but it's important to know what you are. The biggest reason for that is that knowing that helps you understand when, in fact, you can retire. Like Social Security, PERS offers, let's say, 2 flavors of retirement. There's the full benefit and the reduced benefit. And I find that people get a little bit confused because there's different components to this. So I've tried to make it kind of broken out here. Talking about whether or not a person can retire with full benefits. Person qualifies for retirement with full benefits if they meet one of 2 criteria. One criteria is based on years of service, and the other one is based on age. So, for example, as we see on the slide here, if a person has 30 years of service, regardless of their age, they can retire with full benefits from PERS. With OPSRP, there's a little bit more nuance to that. You have to be at least age 58. But again, 30 years is the benchmark for full benefits. We'll get to the reduced bit in a little bit. There's also an age version. And so in other words, if you don't have 30 years of service, but you hit one of these age bands, then you also qualify for full benefits. For tier 1, that age bracket starts at age 58. For tier 2, it starts at age 60. And for OPSRP, it starts at age 65. So regardless of how many years you've worked, depending on your tier, if you hit one of those age benchmarks, then you qualify for full benefits. If you still want to retire, but don't hit one of those benchmarks, whether it be years of service or age, you can still retire, but it will be with a reduced benefit. Because you're going to live longer. From PERS's point of view, they're thinking, okay, this person's retiring, but they're living longer than we originally projected actuarially, so we're going to pay them less. So if you have less than 30 years of service, or you don't meet one of those age benchmarks, then there's a reduction in the benefit. Anybody can retire from PERS starting at age 55. As you can see here, if you don't have 30 years of service and you're not age 58, anywhere between age 55 and 57 in your tier 1, that would be a reduced benefit. For tier 2, anywhere between 55 and age 59 without 30 years of service would be a reduced benefit. And for OPSRP, quite a broad band here, age 55 to age 64 without 30 years of service is a reduced benefit. How much is it reduced? Well, there's actually a table on PERS's website to help you determine that, or we can help you determine that. But for just kind of general planning purposes, if you assume an 8% reduction for each year that you're short of that full age band, then that gives you an idea. So for example, let's say a person has 20 years of service, but they're tier 2 and they're age 59. Okay, they're retiring at age 59, they're 1 year short of full retirement, their pension's going to be reduced by 8%. And so on down the line. 2 years early would be 16%. 3 years early would be 24%. You see how that goes. Again, it's actually a little finer than that. There's a chart we can use to really pin it down, but just for general planning purposes, that gives you an idea. So that's one of the reasons why understanding what tier you are is really important, because it helps determine when you qualify for full benefits. The next slide here. There we go. Hopefully that made sense, because I know people think PERS is really complicated. And the reason for that is because it's really complicated. There are, in a broad sense, two different types of retirement plans. There's the older type called a defined benefit plan. It's the old school, work for a company for X number of years, guarantee a pension for life. There you go. Defined benefit. You tell me how long you're going to be working, I can tell you what your pension's going to be. A lifetime income, defined benefit. The newer type is often referred to, or more commonly known as a 401k. It's a defined contribution account. So we know how much is going into this account each year. I can't tell you what it's going to be worth when you retire, but we know what's going into it. So it's a defined contribution, much more common nowadays. Most companies find this less expensive than guaranteeing a lifetime income with a defined benefit, and that's why they do it. Same thing for PERS, for that matter. In fact, the IAP account is a 401k because you're a public employee. So there's two different types of retirement plans. And the reason it's confusing is you have both. You have both the lifetime income and the defined contribution, the cash. And we'll talk more about kind of how those play out as we go along. But it's important to differentiate between the two because they're not related. One has no impact on the other. You just have two pension plans. And to make it really complicated, of course, PERS sends all that information on one sheet of paper. It'll be interesting to see how much more they can squeeze onto this thing. At first, it was just the pension part, then they added the IAP part. Now they've got this employee stability account. Pretty soon, it's going to be a scroll that you're going to have to unfold to really kind of see. But I want to kind of walk through this a little bit because it helps you understand kind of what you've got to work with. So going to the defined benefit part of it, the lifetime income. In your PERS statement or on your PERS statement, if we break it into chunks, you can kind of get an idea of what talks to what. And I wish they put these on separate pieces of paper. It would make more sense, but there you are. So get my little pointer here. Here we go. Couple of things to know. Then on the beginning, and this is a tier 1 statement. Tier 2 looks very similar. OPSRP is a little bit different in that it doesn't have this member balance we're going to talk about in a minute. But the information otherwise is there to be found. And it has your hire date, your membership date. We'll talk about that in a minute. And you'll notice here it says pension. So the top third, let's say, is related to your lifetime income, your pension benefit. If you're tier 1 or tier 2, you have a member balance right here. For tier 1, there's a regular account, which is guaranteed a certain rate of return. For tier 2, it's always been variable and still is. In any event, it shows you a member balance here, and we'll come to that in a minute. It also shows you what you're being credited with for years of service. And when we talk about how pensions are calculated, what you're going to see is this here is used, the member balance is used in the MoneyMatch calculation, and the years of service is used in the pool formula calculation. Don't worry if that doesn't make sense yet. But I want you to know where you can find that information on this statement. So all of this stuff here has to do with your lifetime income. It has nothing to do with the IAP account. Okay. That is the IAP account. That shows you how it's invested. If you've chosen the target fund, we'll get to target funds in a minute, what you contributed during the year, what it earned, and then what the balance was at the end of the year, and then what the target fund is going to be next year. This is again the defined contribution amount, not the defined benefit, and has absolutely nothing to do with your pension. The last bit you can completely ignore because you're never going to see it. We'll talk about the changes they did to the IAP account in 2020. This kind of reflects that. Yeah, don't worry. You're never going to see that money. Would they reduce the amount of money going into the IAP account and routed it to a separate fund to help pay for pensions? This is showing how much was routed on your behalf, is basically what it boils down to. But on the average statement, this is what you can find. You mentioned full formula and MoneyMatch. So let's talk about those. When a person goes to retire from PERS, PERS performs 2, sometimes 3, mostly 2, calculations to determine what the pension is going to be. And that's true for Tier 1 and Tier 2. For OPSRP, they just perform 1 calculation. It used to be, and the one you used to read about in the paper all the time, was that the MoneyMatch calculation was always the highest. When they ran those 2 calculations, and we're going to walk through some calculations and I'll show you what I'm talking about, but it used to be that MoneyMatch was what everybody retired. That is by far and away no longer the case. I want to say last year, only about 8% of retirees actually qualified under MoneyMatch, or that was their highest payout. Most people now retire under full formula. So we're going to take a look at them. Full formula, remember on the member statement, I showed where that years of service business was. This is why that's important. Full formula calculation is actually pretty straightforward. It uses your years of service, your final average salary, and an annuity factor. The final average salary is your highest 3 consecutive years, average of the highest 3 consecutive years, or the last 36 months, whichever's higher. And on PERS's website, they have an interesting little kind of blurb that I want to mention, and it says, including adjusted total gross salary. So for ancillary duties, extended pay, that sort of thing, that's included in salary as well. So they add it all up and then divide it to come up with an average. The annuity factor for Tier 1 and Tier 2 is 0.0167. The equation is the same for OPSRP, but it's a different factor. It's 0.015, so it's a little bit smaller, and I'll show you what the impact on that looks like. So using the example, the actual numbers from that PERS statement that we looked at, they named their person, I'm a member. Okay. That person had 29 years and 9 months of service. Their salary works out to $93,589, average annual salary. I rounded it down to average it to 90,000. So let's say this person had no raises over the last 3 years. They got 90,000, 90,000, 90,000, divided by 3, we get 90,000. So we take the years of service, multiply it by the average salary, multiply it by the annuity factor, and we come up with a number. Divided by 12, and we look and we find what their monthly pension is going to be, $3,726 in this case. For OPSRP, all things being equal, except for the annuity factor, the pension comes out to $3,346, a fair amount less. The reason I wanted to show that, though, is twofold. One, unfortunately, I do hear people knock the OPSRP plan as being worse, much worse than the Tier 1 and Tier 2. And frankly, I don't feel that's accurate. Yes, it's less, but the assumption was built in when they made the plan that the defined contribution part of the overall picture, that IAP account, was going to make up some of that difference. So the idea being that Tier 1 or Tier 2 person started, at least before 2004, Tier 1, 1996. And so they're going to be retiring sooner than an OPSRP person. This was the assumption. And therefore, their IAP account would not have as much time to grow, and therefore would not be as large as the OPSRP person when they go to retire. And so that the two eventually would kind of balance themselves out. And the numbers kind of crunch out that way. Everybody's mileage is a little bit different, but all things being equal, it's not a bad pension plan. It's just different. But in any event, I wanted to show how a full formula works. The reason it's important to understand this is you can play around with it. Knowing the formula, you can ask yourself, okay, well, what if I work an extra year? So instead of 29.75, it's 30.75. What does that do to the equation? Plug it in. If I take another position or get some extended hours and my average salary goes up, what impact is that going to have? You can plug that in. Conversely, if you were thinking of retiring at 30 years, but let's face it, these last couple of years have been tough, and maybe that's not going to happen. So we reduce the amount of years here. What impact would that have? So using that formula, you can get a feel for what you can expect, frankly, from your pension. One important note is that this is a gross number, meaning this is before taxes. So whatever your tax rate is, if you're trying to figure out what your monthly income would actually be from PERS, you would want to make sure you take taxes into account. The last thing on this is the sick leave. We'll talk more about that actually, and I'll run some calculations here in a little bit, but just to get it started. When a person retires from PPS, Portland Public Schools reports their unused sick leave for Tier 1 and Tier 2 to PERS, and PERS uses half of that in the full formula calculation, and I'll show you what that looks like. Unfortunately for OPSRP, that's not the case. It just doesn't get reported. It doesn't get used in the calculation. So that's full formula. I mentioned there was another way that pensions are calculated, and that was MoneyMatch. And again, we're not seeing this nearly as much as we used to. And here's why. This shows you how it's done anyways. So that same person we talked about before with the 29.75 years of service and the $90,000 salary also had a member balance of $218,654. All right. So when that person retires, the employer has to match it. That's why they call it MoneyMatch. So now that person has to give to PERS, if you will, $437,308. PERS takes that amount. They run it based on age. In this case, the person on that statement was 56 in a month. So 56 in a month, they actually break it out by the month. That person, their equivalency factor is 0.00655. So their monthly benefit under the MoneyMatch calculation is $2,864. What does it mean? Well, a couple of things. Whoops, let me go back the other way here. I'll get there eventually. Come on. When the MoneyMatch calculation is done, the assumption is, of course, that PERS is going to get to keep the $437,000, and they're going to pay you $2,864 a month. When they do both calculations, though, you see that the full formula calculation is actually higher than the MoneyMatch calculation. So that is actually what the pension's going to be. It's not going to be the lower amount. PERS always gives you the higher amount. So they run both calculations. Full formula is higher. This person's retiring with the full formula calculation. They will get $3,726 a month. But on that table, I pointed out that this person, based on their date of birth over here, is only 56 years old. And they don't have 30 years of service. They had 29.75. So they didn't qualify for full retirement, do they? Well, one of the questions that comes up is, well, what about buybacks? Can I do a buyback? Why would I want to do one? This is a good example of the kind of buyback that most people do and why you might want to do it. When you retire from PERS, PERS offers you the opportunity to buy back the time between the hire date and the membership date. Usually it's on the order of 6 months, 8 months. There's usually that kind of thing. This person, obviously, if their hire date was 90 and they weren't a member until 95, then they weren't working full time or enough hours to qualify for membership until 1995. But in most cases, it's 6 to 8 months, which would be perfect in this case because this person was only 3 months short of 30 years of service. So by doing the buyback of the waiting time, now they have actually more than 30 years of service and qualify for full benefits and would get their full pension without there being a reduction in the benefit. If they didn't do that buyback, then their benefit would be reduced. It goes by the month, so it'd be a function about 2%, roughly $90 is how much it would have been reduced if this person did not do the buyback to reach that full retirement benchmark of 30 years. Keeping in mind, you can buy back time in service, can't buy back age. So in this case, it worked out really well. Got this person to 30 years, or at least as close as possible. Everybody's a little bit different. We'll have to take a look at it. Most people do this buyback, even if they don't need it. And the reason for that is it does increase the pension amount. It depends on what your salary is as far as how much of an increase you could expect, but it usually pays for itself. within, let's say, 24 months. So this buyback is generally worth doing. We'll talk about the kind of how to go about doing that maybe a little bit. Short answer is getting a written estimate from PERS. When you do that, they include the information you need to buy back that waiting time. Okay. Any questions on pension calculations? Now might be a good time to pause right there and take a look at it. Peter, are you still with us?
I'm still here.
Ed,
Yeah,
can you
please, come
talk?
on.
I'm sorry, Peter. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, please ask your question. Go for it.
Okay. What about how much are the buybacks? Is it calculated by month or by year, or how does that work?
It's a good question. Technically, it's calculated by how much it increases your pension. A more useful answer is I see purchase prices in the, let's say $1,800 to $2,500 range. So when you submit your PERS application, you would also include a check. There's information on how to do this with the buyback letter. You would include a check for that amount. And then they in turn increase the pension, which I say eventually pays it back in fairly short order. But ballpark, that's what we're talking about. Now, this is the waiting time. I've seen much more expensive buyback amounts for out-of-state teaching time, forfeited time in particular. There are like 13 different types of buybacks a person can actually do. The one I see the most, though, is waiting time, and usually it's not too untoward.
See, Charity Powell has her hand up. You want to speak your question?
Thank you. If you're tier 1 or tier 2 and you have the full formula without a reduction, how does the IAP factor in? Is that just, explain that part.
Yeah, no, good question. It doesn't, is the short answer. So the full formula is based on your years of service, highest average salary, and that annuity factor. That gives you your monthly income. In addition to that, you will get everything that's in the IAP account. It is a side account, it's cash. When you retire from PERS, it's actually included in the same paperwork you fill out to get your pension. They want to know what to do with the IAP account, where to send the check. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation as far as how that's handled. But you get both, is the way to look at it.
That's all the hands I see. We got another one. Lori, go for it.
Okay, so my question is, I just realized about getting the estimate from PERS, the written estimate, and it's getting kind of close in time and they're backed up as usual.
Right.
Because of lack of people and all of that. So does anybody have any experience about how accurate the online, do-it-yourself estimates are if you have all your numbers in a row?
The online estimates that are actually pretty accurate. They improved that system a number of years ago. I want to say 5 or 6 years ago at least, and it's actually pretty accurate. The only fly in the ointment, if you will, in your situation, is it doesn't give you the buyback information. I know you can plug it in as far as fiddling with the time and service, but you really need to have that actual letter from PERS showing the amount that the check needs to be made out for. And I can understand why it's getting a little down to the wire, if you will. The only thing I could suggest would be to contact them and say, look, I want to submit my retirement paperwork. I don't have an estimate. And when more to the point, I don't have my buyback letter. What can I do? And I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. They may let you send that in after the application. They may rush your your case and get you that information. I don't know, but that's where the first place I would start.
So you have to do the buyback before you resign?
Not from when you resign. We'll get to the thing that from retirement from PERS. The buyback is done at the same time.
Okay.
In fact, when you request retirement paperwork from PERS, they give you two envelopes, one to send your retirement application in and the other to send the check back in for the buyback. They're done at the same time.
Okay, because I downloaded the packet.
Mhm.
Because to try and get the paperwork started, but I'm just,
Good.
trying to figure out what's still possible. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Our next, we had a couple more with their hands up. So Hut, and then we had Charity, another question. So Hut, you want to go?
Yeah, thank you. I'm kind of keeping an eye on this 2020 earnings rate, 7.2% on tier one. How are they able to continue to lower our guaranteed earnings rate from, well, it started at 8%. Now we're down to 7.2, and I caught wind of something like a 6.9% starting this year. Is that true?
So two questions there. The first one is I can't answer. How they're able to get away with it, I don't feel qualified to speak to. That's more of a legal issue. But I hear your question and I understand it. You're right. The PERS board, let's see if I can explain this here, because it gets confusing because of what you hear in the news. They talk about assumed rate quite a bit. And the PERS board lowered the assumed rate from 7.2 to 6.9 last year to take effect this year. So you're exactly right. The assumed rate is literally what the board assumes that their investments are going to earn to fund the PERS pension system. To make up any shortfalls, or let me rephrase that, using that, they use that information to determine how much a PERS employer, like the school district, for example, needs to contribute to the PERS system. So as the assumed earning rate goes down, the amount of contributions they want from PERS employers goes up. To help mitigate the impact of that, they have concurrently lowered the guaranteed amount that they pay to the member balances on the tier one accounts. They haven't posted what the new rate is going to be for 2021 yet. I just checked it today, as a matter of fact. It'll be interesting to see what they do. Will they lower it to 6.9? I would think so, but I don't know for sure.
But there's so few of us left in the tier one. How come it's at our expense for that to happen versus everybody else who's got to retire at 8%?
No, you're 100% right. PERS puts out a publication called PERS by the Numbers every year. And I actually downloaded the most recent copy, and if anybody's interested, I can get it to you. But they do a good job of showing kind of changes over time and how people are retiring under what formula. And like I say, MoneyMatch used to be the big one. MoneyMatch was going to bankrupt the state, frankly, because of that assumed rate. When MoneyMatch was originally set up, they were guaranteeing a minimum 8% on the fixed account. And the PERS investment board just couldn't keep up with that. And so there's this growing discrepancy between earnings and obligation. So that's why they came up with tier two. And then that's why they came up with OPSRP, and their own numbers show that they fixed it.
Okay.
There should be no unfunded liability by 2036. So I agree wholeheartedly that they need not keep using the tier one as kind of the whipping,
Right. The whipping board.
post for fixing a system that frankly isn't broken. So I can't explain why they do what they do, because I disagree with what they do. But that's what it is. The good news is I'll run some illustrations here and show you kind of what a money match calculation looks like. Because they keep adjusting the actuarial tables, and they've got new ones that just went into effect this year, the overall impact is not catastrophic. Of course, it depends on how much longer you're going to work in terms of what impact that lowered guaranteed rate is going to have. But the change in the assumption tables for the next year or two is really not huge. But the point is still well taken. Onward and upward. What's next?
Carrie, did you want to ask your question or no? You good? Okay. All right. I think we can move forward for now. Thanks, Ed. Thanks,
Okay.
everybody.
Sure. Yeah. I think we'll get eventually. We're going to get to some real specifics on some of those questions actually, because that's one of the things I did differently in this presentation. Is I actually did some calculations to show you what a money match compared to full formula looks like, and what the changes in the actuarial tables look like, and what difference having some sick leave might have as well. But while we're talking about money, when a person fills out their retirement application, probably the biggest decision they have to make after, am I going to retire, is what option to choose. Keeping in mind, you don't choose what formula you retire under, either money match or full formula. PERS is just going to give you the highest. So you get to decide how many lifetimes is that going to cover. Essentially, there are three choices. You can take the pension, meaning a lifetime income. You can take the lump sum if you're tier 1 or tier 2. Or you can split it and take the lifetime income and half of the lump sum. The lump sum is that member balance. On that statement that we looked at earlier, there was that $218,000 member balance that the employer has to match, that they then run through an annuity table to come up with the money match calculation. In rare cases, in my opinion, it's appropriate to not do that and to just take the money, keeping in mind that when you do that, you're given the pension. To give you an idea of how rare that is, like I said, I'm going into my 20th year in the business now. In that 20 years, I have recommended moving money out of the member balance and taking control of it in lieu of the pension, I want to say twice, maybe 3 times. And that's it. It's that rare. So if you sit down with a financial advisor and their first reaction is to go, oh, we need to roll that money out, get a second opinion, let's crunch some numbers, let's make sure that's in your best interest, because it's definitely not the norm anymore. What's the norm is the pension, taking the lifetime income. Once you've determined that that's what you're going to do, then it gets more complicated, but I've tried to make it simple here. And to give credit where credit is due, it was a wonderful teacher that suggested that I use stick figures to illustrate this. And this has made a world of difference. From PERS's point of view, they are trying to figure out how many lifetimes they're going to be on the paying an income to. So with the stick figures in mind, option 1 is 1 lifetime. It is the highest payout because PERS knows that they're only going to have to pay for the retiree's lifetime, and then once the retiree dies, they're off the hook. It has a few moving parts to it. You can choose some guarantees so that if you were to pass away early in your retirement, someone would get something. I don't see that a lot anymore. That's more of a holdover from the old tier 1 big member balance thing, when people were afraid that they were going to retire. They're giving up, let's say, $500,000 in cash, so they get a guaranteed income for life, but they're worried that they're going to die in the first month of retirement, and PERS is going to walk with $500,000. To mitigate that, refund annuity or the 15 certain, there's some moving parts there. Again, I don't see that as much anymore because the member balance aren't as big as they used to be, and money match isn't what it used to be. So I see, if you're going to choose option 1, I just see the straight option 1 quite a bit more often. The next one is kind of the complete opposite of that, and that's option 2. So option 2 is 2 lifetimes. It's the retiree and a named beneficiary. So if the retiree passes away and the beneficiary is still alive, PERS will continue paying exactly what they were paying to the retiree for the beneficiary's lifetime. So 2 lifetimes, ignoring that it's concurrent, obviously, at some point. It's important to know, though, 2 things. 1, it's age driven in the sense that, again, PERS is trying to figure out how long they're going to be paying somebody. So you wouldn't want to name as your beneficiary somebody that is half your age, because that would have a huge impact on your pension. Conversely, naming somebody that's significantly older might not be so bad. Usually I see this between partners and couples, and they're roughly in the same age. There's a little bit of nuance to it, and that's what they call the A or pop-up option. Statistically, women outlive men, and statistically, more females are educators than males, so they came up with an A option. What the A option allows a person to do is, if the beneficiary dies first, not the retiree can then pop back up to what option one would have been. Hopefully that makes sense. The reason it's important to know that is when you name a beneficiary, let me rephrase that. When you retire from PERS and name your beneficiary, you have 60 days from the date you first receive your pension to make changes. After 60 days, unless it's court ordered, you can't change it. So that's from PERS, because for financial reasons, again, they want to know how long you're going to be on the hook. They won't let you change beneficiaries. So that's why the A option works, is because, yeah, the beneficiary could die first because you can't change the beneficiary. So once the beneficiary dies, it's just you. So that's why there's an A option there. Option 3 kind of splits the difference between the two. It's a 50% survivorship option. So what that means, or as my stick figures show, a person and a half. The person is the retiree. They get their pension. In this case, $2,953. If they predecease the beneficiary, our half stick person, would get 50% of what the retiree was getting. So half of $2,953. Which one is appropriate depends on your circumstances. For single, for sole providers of the household, I see option 2 quite a bit. For couples that both have their own pension plans, I see option 3 used quite a bit, or sometimes option 1. For individuals that frankly don't have beneficiaries they feel they need to take care of, I see option 1 used quite a bit. So which one's right for you depends on kind of your circumstances and what you would like to see happen if something were to happen to you, or conversely to your partner. And those are really the options that you have to choose from. Again, we're talking about the defined benefit, the lifetime income, not the IAP account. Okay. We'll go to this confusing slide, and then we can maybe take a question on that. Actually, no, let me go. I see that Hook raised his hand. Can we answer a question? Is there a question that?
I had a question. It wasn't technically about this, but what is, or how accurate is the estimate machine on when you go to the government thing? How accurate is that?
It's pretty accurate, actually, because they actually pull your information to run it. Let me rephrase that just a little bit, or reposition that. When you run that benefit on PERS's website to see this information here, you'll notice on the left-hand side there's run an estimate. It's got your salary information, employment history, that sort of thing. I would suggest going through it kind of bit by bit and make sure they have the right information. If they do have the right information, meaning your salary and years of service, then their estimate is going to be pretty accurate.
Thank you.
Sure. AAP. I thought about redoing this slide because it's getting kind of confusing, but that was kind of the point, so I left it. Just kind of a brief background on the IAP. On that statement that we first looked at, the Tier 1 statement that had the $218,000 member balance. The member balance, and this is true for Tier 1 and Tier 2, whenever you see member balance, that was the 6% that was coming out of your paycheck before August 1 of 2004. After 2004, meaning when they set up the OPSRP plan, they stopped contributions going into the member balance because they didn't want to have to match it, frankly, and instead routed it to the IAP account. So now everybody has an IAP account, Tier 1, Tier 2, and OPSRP. Originally, it was 6%. It was going into your member balance. Then they shuffled it off to the IAP. Everything that was in the member balance stayed there. They just no new contributions, but it still goes up and down with the market, or up if you're in the fixed account. But the new contributions went to the IAP. In July of I want to say last year, but no, it was the year before that, 2020. They changed the amount that was going into the IAP account. They didn't change the amount coming off the paycheck or being paid out of the paycheck, but they changed the amount going into the IAP. For tier 1 and tier 2, it went from 6% contributions to the IAP to 3.5%. The 1.5% difference, right, or 2.5% difference, is that being routed to that bottom of the statement there, the pension fund relief helping pay them for it thing. The OPSRP accounts also had a reduction, but not as much. Instead of 6%, now it's 5.25 going in. So that's why this is so confusing, is they have changed when it started, how much was going in, and now again, how much is going in. But it's still there, and it goes up and down with the market. There are no guarantees with the IAP. It's invested in the market, and we'll talk about what control you have over that, get to target funds. But again, it's cash. When you retire, you get the account value. So again, contributions 3.5 or 5.25, depending upon what tier you're in. It's a 401a. And the reason I mentioned that is, one, most people have heard of 401ks. This is very similar. Two, it's a pre-tax account, meaning it hasn't been taxed yet. So any money when you retire, we'll get to what to do with it in a minute, but if you were to just take it and put it in your pocket or your checking account, it would be a taxable event. So any money that comes out of the plan and into anything other than another tax qualified investment would be a taxable event. It's investment in the market. When I say target funds, okay, there are, I want to say 10, maybe 11 different target funds to choose from. The target is age 65. So they invest, depending upon, if you don't do anything, they're just going to do it automatically. They'll invest the account based on the assumption that you are going to want to access it at age 65. So as you get closer to age 65, the investment gets more conservative. So if you have a long way to go, it's aggressive. And as you get closer to 65, it's conservative. You can, instead of just kind of letting that fly on automatic, you can actually change that. Once a year before, I want to say the end of September, would be the beginning, I'll have to double check the date, of each year, you can tell them, there's a paper, obviously, to do this, tell them to reallocate the account to a different target, or even different target funds. You can choose more than one. And then in January of the following year, they reallocate it to the new target. So if you don't like the target fund you're currently in and want to change it to something more conservative, more aggressive, you can do that. So it's nice that you have the option. Didn't used to have that option. That's fairly recent. Again, the highlight with the IAP though is there's no impact on your pension. So when you get your PERS statement, it's got a little bit of pension information on it. It shows you your member balance if you have one in your years of service, but it also has that IAP account, and the two are completely separate. Okay. When you retire, it must be taken in some fashion, the IAP account. And by that I mean there's really only one option, and that is what you see is what you get. Most people roll it out. And by that I mean it's in PERS. When you submit the PERS paperwork, along with that paperwork, in that paperwork, as a matter of fact, is a section to tell them where to send the money. There's some moving parts to that. You could actually split it and have some of it go here and some of it go there. But the short of it is rolling it out. They want it out of PERS. And the reason for that is they don't want to be liable. They got into trouble back in 2008 because they were being overly aggressive with what is essentially a retirement account. And now with people, by definition, in retirement, they don't want to have to be responsible for managing it. So they require people to do something with it. Most people roll it from PERS and roll it to another tax qualified, that is to say, hasn't been taxed yet, account, so that's a non-taxable event. So it goes from PERS to an IRA, say a traditional IRA. Then once it's in the traditional IRA, if you need to draw from it, you can. If you don't have to until age 72. You control it at that point, not PERS. I find that to be a benefit because it gives you control over how it's invested and when the money comes out, which is a big deal from a tax point of view. But in some cases, it makes more sense to leave the money with PERS and take systematic distributions. For people that are not yet age 59 and a half, for example, that need money, you can leave it with PERS and tell PERS to send a check every month for 5 years until it's all gone. And so they'll take the account balance, divide it by 60 months, send you a check each month, and then at the end of 60 months, they don't have the money in PERS anymore, and you've got all of it paid out. That's the other option, is systematic distributions from PERS. The long and short of it being, when you retire, you get your pension and you get the IAP account in one fashion or another. And again, 9 times out of 10, most people want to control it and not leave it with PERS, so they roll it out either to their 403B or to it. I see that someone raised their hand, and I think that's it for the IAP.
I have a question.
Lisa? Sure.
For the second bullet point there, the lump sum over 5, 10, 15, did you say if you're not 59 and a half, you can do that? So if you're
Yes.
if you're older than 59 and a half, that's not an option?
I'm sorry, you're right. That I worded that poorly. That is still an option. The reason I don't see it used very much is this. Most people roll the IAP, which is a 401A, to an IRA. With a 401A, meaning your IAP account, and a separation from service, you can take withdrawals from the account and not have a 10% penalty from the IRS for early distribution. If you roll the money to an IRA, then it's subject to the provisions of an IRA. And one of those provisions is that if you are not yet age 59 and a half, there is a 10% penalty from the IRS for taking distributions. So for people that want to take distributions, and by that I mean cash, not just rolling it over, but actually need the money or want to use the money, and are not yet 59 and a half, then leaving it with PERS and taking distributions from PERS, because it's a 401A, avoids that 10% penalty from the IRS. But that you don't have to be under age 59. Sure. Oh, more hands. Okay. Before we get on to the weird stuff. I am kind of new at this. Is there another question, Peter?
Lori, did you want to ask a question? I only have one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's a public, the IIP is a 403B because we're public employees. Can we roll it into a 401K that's not set up for public employees? Because I have an inherited 401K because I'm a widow.
Okay. Well, I'd have to look at the inherited part of it, but if it'll take, it's a 401A. So the short answer is it would be okay with PERS. The question is going to be, is it okay with the 401k provider that you're currently with? It's up to them.
Oh, okay.
Not all plans will take incoming funds that way, but PERS will kick it out. That won't be a problem.
So yeah, because I mean, I'm retiring, so I'm not any longer going to be a public employee, right?
Right.
Okay.
So yeah, that would be fine with PERS. It's up to your current 401k.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. A couple other PERS notes while we're here, and then we'll get into the district. And actually, we're coming in on time, I think. As I mentioned, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that's befuddled at how fast these years seem to be going all of a sudden. But my gosh. Okay, so back in 2019, the Senate Bill 1049 passed, and most of it didn't have a large impact, frankly, on people that made less than $195,000 a year, which is most of the teachers I know. Probably the biggest impact that it had was it did away with the cap on working in a PERS covered position after you retire from PERS. As I'm sure people you know have retired and then come back and do some work in the schools. there's an hourly cap normally, how much additional work in a PERS covered position a PERS retiree can do and still be considered a PERS retiree. For tier 1 and tier 2, that is 1,039, 1,040 hours. For OPSRP, it's 600 hours. In 2019, they did away with it. They suspended it, is probably the way to put it, until the end of 2024. So from now until the end of 2024, if you retire and then come back to work in a PERS covered position, it doesn't matter how much you work, PERS isn't going to care. After that, those hourly caps presumably will come back into place. Keep in mind that we're only talking about PERS covered positions, which is most of the public employers in Oregon, but does not include any private employers. So if you went to work at a private school or Howell's Book, PERS wouldn't care. And if you work in Washington, for example, PERS wouldn't care. Again, we're only talking about PERS covered positions. And then we talked about the investment windows. Those are probably the two biggest holdovers from that Senate bill. Another consideration that comes up quite a bit is, well, finish this up here and then we'll get to that. Benefit estimates have come up a couple of times. For those people that aren't aware of what we're talking about, on PERS's website, there you can run your own benefit estimates. So you can log in, they have a login for you. I think it's on their first page actually, and run your own estimates. But at some point in time, you're going to want to do an official PERS estimate from PERS so that you can get that buyback information if for no other reason. And on PERS's website, let's see if I can just bring it up here. Bear with me. Let's see if I can do this. No, I don't have it up. Okay. See if this does. Okay. So on PERS's website, remember, the category I want to retire, which I think is brilliant, is benefit estimates. Clicking that will take you to where you would find the form to request a benefit estimate right there. Tier 1, tier 2 written benefit estimate. If you haven't done one already, they allow 2 a year. And if you're thinking of retiring anytime in the next now to 2 years from now, I would go ahead and get the ball rolling and ask for an estimate. As has been pointed out, they're maybe a little behind on the paperwork at the moment, so sooner is better than later. But I would definitely start with that. That one will get you the Bible's letter, and two, might show you if there's anything wrong, in the sense that if you were expecting a lot more and their calculations are way off, it's best to know that before it's time to turn in the retirement application. The other thing to keep in mind, unfortunately, is the COVID circumstances. The Tigard and Salem offices are closed to the public, they said, until further notice. That is something of an inconvenience, as it was convenient to drop by occasionally and pick up whatever paperwork you needed or drop it off. But they are there on phone, and there's actually a kind of an online email system that you can use to contact them as well. And then they also encourage people to fax or mail their retirement applications and checks as opposed to dropping it off at the office, because no one's at the office. Some other changes, and we talked about this a little bit, and I'll look at the actuarial bit here in a few minutes, but there was a change to the actuarial equivalency factors. That's only used in the MoneyMatch calculation, and that took effect beginning of this month. Wasn't a big change, but just so you know, they do that every 2 years now. And then, as we discussed earlier, a change in the assumed earnings, and whether or not that's going to have an impact on tier 1 individuals in the regular accounts, I don't know at the moment. I hate to speculate. Wasn't a huge change, but every change, is a change, and it always seems to be a change downward, not up. So those are probably some of the biggest changes. The other consideration that comes up quite a bit is what to do with unused sick leave. Should you take it or not take it? Some people have, normal amounts. I've seen some people with over 1,000 hours. Incredible. How big a difference does it make? So I thought I would run some numbers and see if I could figure it out. And so using that same person that originally we started with, I'm a member, 29 years, 9 months of service, salary. unused sick leave, 500 hours. What does that look like? Well, the original illustration that we ran showed that this person was going to have a monthly pension of $3,726 based on a final average salary of $90,000, right? But they have 500 hours of unused sick leave. So TPS reports that to PERS. PERS uses half of it, so now it's 250 hours. Their hourly rate was $62.50 an hour. So $62.50 times 250 hours is $15,625. That's added to the final salary. So in this person's case, we had a salary of 90,000, and now we had the 90,000 plus the 15,625. So that last number is actually what, 105,625. Then we divide it by 3. So their final average salary goes from 90,000 to 95,208 because of their unused sick leave. Using that number in the same formula shows that their pension goes from $3,726 to $3,941. So it made $220 a month difference in their pension, having 500 hours of unused sick leave. Obviously, everybody has different amounts of sick leave, and let's face it, if you get sick, you need to use leave. But just, is it worth having? Yes. Unfortunately, it does not apply to OPSRP, but it does apply to Tier 1 and Tier 2. So the reason this happens is once you resign from PPS, they report those hours to PERS, and they wipe the slate clean. And we'll talk about the bubble in a minute, but if you're doing the PERS bubble, then you go back to accruing, I think it's 1 day a month of sick leave. So it kind of just wipes the slate clean there. And that's PERS. We'll talk about a few of the PPS points, and then I think we're making good progress. I thought I saw a hand go up.
Yes, excuse me. Thank you. I have a question.
Oh.
Is there a limit on the sick leave? Because I have like 1,300 hours.
No.
Great.
That's a lot of hours. Yeah, no.
Okay.
That'll make a difference. Any other PERS questions before we dive into what PPS brings to the table?
I have a question, Ed.
Hey, Julie.
Hey, so you, on that last slide, you had 500 hours of sick leave, and then so they divide those in half when they calculate the benefit?
Yeah, PERS uses half of them.
Okay, so you only get paid for half of your 6 days.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Why they do that, I don't know. But they do. And again, if there's more questions, I'm sure we can get to that at the end here. We're making progress. So PPS. The reason I flipped this around is I used to start with the PPS stuff, but all of the PPS stuff actually is predicated on the assumption that you qualify for retirement from PERS. So it made more sense to start with PERS. Probably the first thing that comes up the most is the bubble. For want of a better term, we'll call it the bubble. It's been called a number of different things over the years. What it is, in a nutshell, is separating from service technically from PPS, retiring from PERS, and then continuing to work the rest of the school year in PPS. It's important to keep in mind that those are two separate entities, PPS and PERS. It's entirely possible to quit working at PPS and not retire from PERS, just go inactive as far as a PERS member is concerned. It's not possible to retire from PERS unless you've separated from service from your PERS employer, in this case, PPS. But they are two separate entities. So these benefits are a function of PPS and what they have, and what PAT, frankly, has fought for you with them to get. It hasn't. PERS may not even know of these. So this is a function of the district. And the first one is the bubble. The qualifications for the bubble, in order to retire and continue to work the rest of the school year, are pretty straightforward. One, you have to resign from PPS, then you retire from PERS, and then you're rehired by PPS as a temporary employee. So obviously you need to be able, in order to retire from Oregon PERS, you have to be qualified to retire from PERS. So you would have to at least be age 55 or have 30 years of service. Once you've done that, you continue to receive the same salary you've been receiving for the rest of the school year, same health benefits. The only real change is that the money that was coming out and being routed to the IAP account no longer comes out and is routed to the IAP account. But because you never saw that in your net take-home pay, you wouldn't see any change in your net take-home pay. As mentioned previously, though, unused sick leave is reported to PERS, so it does wipe the slate clean there. So all the sick leave that you've accrued will no longer be available to you, as well as, I want to say, professional development, and there's a few other kind of extracurricular benefits or activities that you might do that would no longer be available. As far as paperwork is concerned, the district resignation form is only a one-page sheet, pretty easy to fill out. They do need it 30 days in advance of when the person is going to retire. So if the standard bubble, if you will, runs from December through the rest of the school year, June. You can actually bubble anytime during that up to the last month, June, but most people do it either December or January. So if you were retiring effective December 1st from PERS, you would need to have your resignation form in by let's say the end of October 31st, November 1st, to give them their 30 days. And that's true going forward. So if you wanted January 1st, it would need to have been in by December, February, January, and so on and so forth. Another question I get asked a lot is the bubble going to be around next year? Short answer is yes. Longer answer is the bubble is a function of the contract currently. And so as the contract goes, so does the bubble. 2 points. One, the current contract is set to expire June 30th of this year. Unless a new contract is in place by June 30th of this year, a person that retires after June 30th will retire under whatever contract is in force at that time, meaning the current contract. So, unless there's a new contract that completely does away with the bubble, yes, the bubble is going to be there because it's in the current contract. It's impossible, I think, for me to be able to say how the contract negotiations are going to go. Having been working with PAT for a number of years and quite a few contract negotiations, I would be stunned, frankly, if a new contract was ready to go by June 30th. So I feel confident in saying, yes, the bubble is going to be there. In addition to that, there's a little blurb down at the bottom of the current contract at section 15.4.7, which I like very much. And it says, section 15.4, which is to say reemployment of retirees, in other words, the bubble, shall expire 1 year after the successor contract is ratified. So even if a new contract were ready to go on June 30th of this year, the bubble would still be in place for the next school year. So that's good to know. It's nice to have that degree of certainty in anything, frankly, in this day and age. Pretty excited about that myself. So that's kind of how the bubble works and when. Is the bubble a good idea? Most of the time, frankly, yes. Not always. By that, I mean this. When you retire, let me rephrase that. When you start the bubble, you are essentially, you're starting your PERS retirement. So you're freezing your pension where it's at. You'll no longer be accruing time and service for the full formula calculation. You'll no longer be earning interest on the member balance for the MoneyMatch calculation. So that's one thing to take into consideration. For full formula retirees, all things being equal, typically it's worth doing, frankly. Collecting your normal paycheck plus whatever your pension is going to be for 6 or 7 months outweighs the impact that starting that pension 6 months early has. Again, I can put some numbers to it in your individual cases, but it typically works out that way. For MoneyMatch, it's not always that simple. If a person is in fact a MoneyMatch candidate, meaning they have a fairly large member balance, the amount of interest that they give up on a 6 or 7 months on, let's say, $500,000 might not pan out. So if you're a MoneyMatch person, then it's worth actually sitting down and really crunching the numbers against the interest rate and make sure that it's in your best interest to do the bubble. But for most people, yes, that makes sense. Another advantage to the bubble is it does give you an opportunity not only to collect your paychecks, but to get the pension started. PERS takes about 90 days to get the ball rolling as far as the pension goes. Now, they pay you from your retirement date, so the first check's a big one, but it takes a while to get it. So if you were to just quit work, sign up for your pension, and have to wait for 3 months, unless you've got cash on hand, that could be problematic. So doing the bubble gives you a chance to get the pension monies coming in while you're still employed. And then the last bit is you kind of like with the district, when you retire under PERS, you retire under whatever provisions are in place or annuity tables are in place when you retire. So generally, when you going forward, if they make changes, it should not impact people that are already retired. And that's more or less been borne out. So that's probably the biggest thing as far as the bubbles concerned. The other big one that comes up for the district benefits is the health benefits. When a person retires from PPS, again, I doubt PERS even knows about this. This is PPS. You qualify for the benefit. The benefit is pretty straightforward. It's basically 100% of your health care minus vision and dental, and 50% of a named, well, let me phrase that, 50% of your spouse or partner. Does not include children. You qualify for it if you qualify for retirement from PERS. That's why I started with PERS. And you have at least 15 years of service, and does not need to be consecutive, but 15 years of service with the district by September 30th of 2020. So if you meet that benchmark, then you should qualify for the benefit and are not yet age 65, because the benefit, again, is 100% of your health premiums, but it's only for 60 months, 5 years, or until age 65 when you qualify for Medicaid. And of course, it has to be one of the plans offered by the Health and Welfare Trust and that. It used to be that a person could defer the benefit. So they would retire, let's say at age 58, self-pay till age 60, start the benefit at age 60. That would carry them through 65, and then they could start Medicare. The idea being that 58 to 60 is going to be less expensive because you're younger than 60 to 65 because you're older. That's no longer a possibility. Now, when you retire and you're using the health benefit, PPS pays first. Then if there's any gap between when their benefit ends and Medicare begins, you're on that. That's out of your pocket. There's a real monetary value associated with 5 years worth of healthcare premiums, and it's a great benefit if you qualify for it. The other one I hear a lot about is the early retirement stipend. First off, a bit of a misnomer as far as the name is concerned. It's early retirement in relationship to age 62. Reason for that is the stipend is $425 a month. Again, it's a 60-month benefit, 5 years, or until age 62. 62 is as early as a person can retire from Social Security. So if you retire before age 62, you're technically retiring early. It's not necessarily earmarked for helping to pay for any insurance premiums you might have for a partner or picking up vision and dental coverage, but it's often used. But again, it's a gross amount, so it's going to be less than that in your pocket, but you're free to do with it as you will. Another incentive is what they call the hire assignment and transfer. I want to say this is section Article 18 in the contract. Basically, this is brilliant, actually. In my opinion, the district wants to know who's going to be around next year, and they want to know as soon as possible. So to facilitate that, there is an incentive, so they get the FTE right, hopefully, for people to turn in their resignation forms before they actually walk out the door. So if you're resigning and you know you're going to resign, you might as well go ahead and capture this. Turning in your resignation form before January 15th. Doesn't mean you have to retire on January 15th. It could be June, whenever, but letting them know about January 15th will get you an extra $1,250 in your last paycheck. And if not sure, but you wait until February and then let them know before February 15th, you'll get an extra $700 in your paycheck. Again, that's paid in the final paycheck. And that's consideration. Well, that was another district bit. Before I go on to the next slide, are there any questions on the district bit? Little considerations. So the question, should you stay or should you go? Honest answer is I can't answer that for you. Were you close to retirement anyways? I mean, there's some considerations. Were you close to retirement anyways? And frankly, with things getting as difficult as they are, is it worth staying around? That's one consideration. You like your job. That's another. And I don't mean to be dismissive of that. Every educator I've worked with loves their job when we're talking about working with the kids. They don't like the paperwork and all the stuff going on in the background. So I kind of know the answer to that already, but more, I guess maybe a better way to phrase it would be, can you tolerate the job as it currently is for longer? If you calculate your pension now and calculate it a year or two from now, is the difference between those two numbers sufficient to warrant continuing what you're doing? That's an interesting one to take a look at. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, frankly. And then more maybe to the point is, can you afford to retire? If we crunch out the numbers, but let's say you're not yet close to Social Security, but you do qualify to retire from PERS, is that going to be enough to get you to Social Security? Or do you need to work while you're in retirement? Do you have enough money? A lot of people don't know where to begin with that question. And so I say 70%. And what I mean by that is conventional wisdom teaches that a person need have 70% of their pre-retirement income when they go into retirement to maintain their current lifestyle. Now, everybody's numbers are a little bit different, of course, and if you came up with a budget, that helps quite a bit. But at least it kind of gets you on the road. So if you crunch all the numbers and you see that you're going to be making about 70% of what you're currently making, okay, we're close. If you crunch all the numbers and it comes in at 40% of what you're currently making, well, that's not so good. Conversely, if you're hitting 90, I think you're okay. But 70% is a good place to start. Is there something you would rather be doing? Retiring to something as opposed to from something? It's a big deal, actually. I've seen a lot of people get very happy when they go into retirement, not necessarily because they're retiring, but because they get to do what they like to do. As I mentioned earlier, you can actually work after you retire from PERS, particularly if it's not in a PERS covered position. And then finally, when were you planning on taking Social Security? If you wanted to push it out as far as possible, is that going to change when you can retire? Or if you were going to take it at 62, does that move up when you're planning? So those are some of the things to think about, and some of the things, frankly, that I'm happy to try to figure out. For this, what do I do and I'm going to get paid for? Answering these questions is what I do, and I get paid for it really in a couple of ways. If we end up doing business together, investing together, I'll likely make money that way. I can be commission-based, I can be fee-based. I am a fiduciary, so there's just all sorts of different ways I can get compensated financially. Even if we don't do business together, or there's no money involved, I like working with teachers. Teachers like talking to teachers. Talk nice about me around the water cooler when we finally are able to get back to having a water cooler. And I would consider that compensation as well. That's how I do my advertising. On all of these slides, which again will be on PAT's website, you'll see my email address is down there at the bottom. Feel free to drop me a question in line. If you want to get in touch and meet, even virtually, that's fine too. We can discuss your situation. So hopefully this has helped a bit as far as how PERS works, what you can expect from it, what the district brings to the table, and kind of how it all ties together. Here's some contact information if you need to get in touch with me. Email is probably the best, easier to manage anyway. But anyways, fine. And I think that's all I've got. Are there any questions? We're hitting it right on time.
We're going to run till 6, so we have definitely have time for questions because we're going to go to 6. So. Pearson.
Hi there. I'm not sure if I'm going to ask this question the correct way or not, but when you were talking about buyback, is it possible when you buy back that you buy additional years? So like if I don't qualify according to PERS because I'm, I may be 2 years short, does that buyback or buy additional years to, or is that, am I misunderstanding that?
No, I think I understand what you're asking. And it's an interesting question. I haven't actually had that come up much. Unfortunately, you can only buy back what is available. Now, again, there's actually quite a few different things a person can buy back: military time, out-of-state teaching time, forfeited time, so on and so forth, waiting time. And on that PERS website where I showed you where the benefit estimate was, there's also, you can find what's called a pre-retirement guide. And in that pre-retirement guide, it shows you an explanation of the 13 different types of buybacks you can do. That being said, it's necessary to have something to buy back. Simply trying to close the gap, let's put it that way. Being willing to pay to close the gap between when you would otherwise qualify for retirement and when you don't, unfortunately, is not an option unless that buyback time is time to start. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I'll take a look at it. Thanks very much.
Hud, I see your hand up again. You want to ask another question?
Yeah, thanks. When I figure out my estimate on the government paid PERS, and I add my sick leave hours, and then when I do it again and I don't add my sick leave hours, I get the same estimate. Is that because they don't ever calculate your sick leave hours until you finally retire in case you actually use them before then?
Yes.
Okay, so the sick leave hours are never really calculated in until the end.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Good call. I forgot about that.
Okay, oh, and last thing, are you gonna email us this information that's up here on the screen right now?
I'm gonna have it available on the PAT website. Yeah. So you guys can rewatch the recording and we'll have its presentation as well. So
Perfect, thank you.
yeah. I know I have a few more hands. I'm gonna drop into chat right now for folks. Before you leave, we have another excellent workshop coming up next week on the 13th about navigating the student loan quagmire, and a really helpful tool that NEA has for you to use. So if you're interested in that, and like me, you are drowning in your student loans, this will be a good workshop for you to attend. But I had Jolene up next.
Yeah, Ed, thanks for the presentation. Been to 1 year before, so it's very helpful to go through it again. Just a clarifying question on the IEP. So if I retire at, say, 58, if I leave it with PERS, I could take it out in over a 5 or 10 year distribution, or I can roll it into an acceptable IRA, but would not be able to access it until 59 and a half. Is that correct?
You get that exactly right.
Okay. So, and then just so you're only talking about a year and a half, you wouldn't get it, but then you have total control. And then if I wanted to, like, okay, I needed an equal monthly amount, you could do it that way, or I could do a lump sum here and leave the rest in. Is that correct?
Once you've rolled it out?
Yeah, once it's in a separate, and you hit 59 and a half.
Yeah, that's it. No, that's exactly right. You have complete control of it in terms of distributions and accessing it. Well, really at any point, but without penalty at age 59 and a half.
Okay.
if it's in an IRA. If you, just to kind of complete that loop, if you do in fact take the money systematically from PERS, let's say over a 5-year period of time, starting at age 58, one question that comes up is, well, then, and when I hit 59 and a half, can I roll it out? The answer is no. Once you start systematic distributions from PERS, it pretty much runs on rails. And the reason for that is IRS regulation, I want to say 72T, it might be 72I. They're avoiding the 10% penalty by paying systematic and, there's another word I'm looking for, but the systematic distributions
Right.
avoids that 10% penalty for 5 years. And so they can't break it.
Okay, so just to summarize it, the only disadvantage of rolling it out on my own is I might have a 1.5-year gap before I could use it, but then I could just leave it there, not do anything with it, take $10,000 out, use it, not draw anything. Is that, am I getting that right?
Yes, you are in a broad sense, but let me throw something at you that you might like. When you retire from PERS and let them know what to do with the IAP account, on the paperwork, it'll let you split the funds, any percentage you want. One split going to an investment, the other split going to you personally. So if you're trying to make up income for a year or 1.5 years before you hit 59 and a half, for example, depending upon how much money we're talking about, potential tax consequences, it is possible, because it's coming from PERS, it avoids that 10% penalty from the IRS. You could peel off whatever you need for income for a year and roll the rest of it to an IRA.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
What's that?
I had one more hand up. Betty, you want to go?
Hi, yes, thank you for that presentation. I'm sorry I came in late.
Oh, that's PhD.
One question is, how do we get the recording for the part that I missed?
So we're gonna post it as soon as we can up on the PhD website.
Okay,
Yeah, so
Okay.
just keep an eye out. Hopefully, if it's not up by tomorrow, then for sure we should have it up by Monday.
perfect, thanks. And my other question kind of was like the person before me. So to reach that 70% of pre-retirement income, do people sometimes take their PERS and marry it with the IAP, peeling off some of that money per month and then investing the rest?
That's exactly right. A lot of times, what I end up doing is, rephrase this, to help supplement the PERS income until, let's say, until the person takes Social Security. So let's say someone retires at 58 or 60. We've got 2 years before we can start Social Security. So we manage the IAP to facilitate, to generate the income that they need, with the idea being, and even if we have to drain the principal a little bit, tap the principal, with the idea being, once we start the Social Security, then we can dial back the amount of money we're taking from the IAP account and grow it back up. So yes, the IAP is often used as a supplement to income as needed.
Okay, and I'm older than my husband, but it doesn't matter. So when I turn 65, the 5-year insurance for the member will stop. So then I have to I assume that I'll have to do 1 year full insurance for my husband.
Here, correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say yes to that.
I believe that's right.
Yeah, I'm going to find that here. Okay, but yes, as soon as the benefit is a function of the member, and when the member is Medicare eligible, then it ceases.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That was all the hands I had. I don't see anything else in the chat. And we are at
Thank you all very much.
6:03, so perfecto. Thank you, Ed, as always, phenomenal. And as I said just a couple minutes ago, we will post the recording of the site webinar up on our PAT website, pdxteachers.org. Hopefully by tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then we'll make sure it's up there by Monday, along with Ed's presentation. So you guys can draw on that for the resources. And then obviously his information is up on screen. So make sure you write that down and get a hold of him if you want to chat some more.
Thank you all very much. And Peter, thank you so much for doing the great job that you do.
Of course. Have a great night, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.